So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our spring conference. This afternoon, we have a 1-hour session with myself, Tommi Grover, the Managing Director of Multilingual Matters, and more importantly, with Anna Roderick, our Editorial Director, who will be able to answer all of your questions that you might ever have had on how to submit a book proposal, what to do with the work that you're currently doing, and generally how to engage with the publishing process. And following our 1-hour session, there will be a further author showcase of 1 hour. So Anna, I think over to you. Would you like to briefly describe everything about the world of engaging with an academic publisher?
I'm glad you narrowed that down then. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, hopefully. There we go. Okay, so just before I start, a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that we only publish books. And so if anything I say contradicts something you've been told by a journal editor or a journal publisher, believe them, not me. It's a good 14, 15 years since I worked on journals, so my knowledge is very, very out of date of journals. Multilingual Matters operates very differently from bigger publishers as well, I think. So again, check with them if I say anything that contradicts something you've been told by someone who works for a different publisher. And lastly, please do ask questions, and I hope this is one of the main takeaways from this session, is that please don't be scared to ask questions, both now and at any point during the publishing process, or just get in touch and ask questions. I think, as with any industry, we do lots of things and say lots of things that are very obvious to us, but they're not necessarily obvious if you don't work in publishing. So if anything doesn't make sense, please do ask. So I'm going to talk about lots of things to do with publishing a book, and the reason I've done it in this weird colour thing is I kind of wanted to emphasize the amount of what I'm going to talk about that happens before you start writing your book, ideally. So everything in blue, at least some of it needs to be done before you start writing. So I'm going to talk about deciding whether a book is the right publication for you and whether you're at the right stage in your career to write a book. I'm going to talk about how to choose a publisher, because much as I would like to say that everyone should publish everything with Multilingual Matters, including that series about a boy wizard that you've got hidden in your bottom drawer, we would not be the best publisher for lots of things, including children's fiction. Book proposal, this is really important. Obviously, this is your chance to set out your stall to the publisher. So we'll talk about how to write a successful book proposal. I'll talk really briefly about how to rewrite your thesis for publication. I've got lots of information that I can send you, and I think some of it is on our website as well. But I'll go through the main points of that. I'll talk very briefly about putting an edited book together. And I'll also talk about working with a publisher and what you can expect from us and what we expect from you. So you're here, presumably, most of you, because you're thinking about writing a book. So there are some questions you need to ask yourself before you even start thinking about what your book might look like or which publisher would be the best publisher, and certainly before you get to the stage of writing a book proposal. One is, have you published anything else? Have you published a couple of journal papers? Have you presented at conferences? Have you reviewed books for journals? or for something like Linguist List, we are unlikely to publish a book by someone who's never published a journal paper or a book review or presented at a conference. Partly this is because when you get to the stage of writing a book manuscript and we send it out for peer review, you will have invested a couple of years of your life in writing a book manuscript, probably. And it's then possible that you will get 2 reasonably critical peer reviews back. And if you have little to no experience of dealing with that process, that's pretty devastating. Whereas if you've written some journal articles, had them peer reviewed, if you've presented at conferences and got some feedback from the questions after your presentation, you've already taken a step down that path of dealing with peer review and of rewriting your ideas, and that's really important. The second one is a really difficult question to have to ask yourself, and I think this is somewhere where you might want to get input from colleagues as well, is there a book in your thesis? And I think this particularly applies to PhD theses. The truth is that there isn't a book in every PhD thesis, and that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with it or with your research. It just means that a book which is expensive and which takes a long time to produce isn't necessarily the best outlet for your work. So it may be that you've studied a really specific context and there just isn't a sensible way of making that particular piece of research more generalizable to wider context. And you would be much better about thinking about journal publication, that kind of thing. Again, is a book the most suitable format given your audience and your timescales? Book publishing is pretty slow, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on. Ultimately, academic books are very expensive, and you have to ask yourself, and it's not an easy question to ask yourself, will someone pay €40 for this piece of research? And the last one is, do you have the experience to write what you're intending to write? And this really applies to, and it doesn't happen very often, but we do occasionally get book proposals from people at a very early stage of their career who are proposing a book that's a kind of grand overarching theory of everything, or brings together the disciplines of sociolinguistics and I don't know, chemistry or something. And I think you have to take a step back if that's the kind of thing you're thinking about proposing to a publisher, and think, can I write this honestly, and is there a reason that no one else has ever written this? So if you consider all those questions and you think that there is a book in this and I think I can do it, and I've written journal articles and dealt with peer review, and I think this is the stage that I'm at now, then you want to start looking at a publisher. And as I said, I would love to tell you that we should publish everything, but realistically that's not the case. You have to look at what you're trying to achieve with the book publication. So it may be that you need to publish a book in order to write that down on your tenure application. It may be that you want to get your thesis or your research project and get it to reach people in other disciplines, related but other disciplines. You may be after fame and fortune, in which case I'd suggest that academic publishing is probably not the right avenue for you at all. If you're looking to publish because you need to put it on your CV or your tenure application, you need to have a think about who's going to be assessing that. Because if you're, for example, your dean of faculty, is I don't know, an English literature person, they're unlikely to have heard of us, but they will have heard of Cambridge University Press. So you need to work out whether actually you'd be better off at least trying to publish with a big global publisher that anyone who's going to be looking at your CV will have heard of. What do the publisher generally publish? This is kind of an obvious one, but you would be surprised. Do they, if you're thinking about publishing poetry, do they actually publish poetry? If they don't, it's probably not worth proposing poetry to them. Do they publish monographs, or do they publish books based on PhDs? Do they publish edited collections? So spend some time on the website, looking on conference tables when you get to go to conferences. Have a look at what they publish. Do they have a series that's a natural fit for your book? Have a look at the other titles in the series. Are these titles that you're referencing? Are they authors that write in the same areas as you? Who are the series editors of that series? Will they be interested in, understand your work? In an ideal world, all series editors are open to lots of different methodologies and different theoretical takes than their particular preferred ones. Realistically, that's not always the case. And do they have a good reputation for dealing with authors? And this is particularly important if you're looking at a book based on your thesis, because you're likely to need more input from the series editor and more support than if this is your, 6th book, 7th book. I've touched briefly on reasons why you might want to go for a bigger publisher, but there are obviously advantages to publishing with a smaller publisher. So someone like us, or John Benjamin's, for example, or one of the smaller university presses. We are very good at taking risks and innovating, because there's a much smaller decision-making chain in Multilingual Matters or John Benjamin's than there is in Cambridge University Press or Taylor and Francis. If you send a proposal for something that's completely groundbreaking and innovative in form to someone like Routledge, your commissioning editor that you talk to will then have to go and demonstrate that your book will make money to people who are not necessarily that interested in linguistics. And that's quite hard to do for something that's completely novel and groundbreaking. And we're also much more focused on our particular area, which has huge advantages for marketing and for fitting your book into its particular bit of our list. But obviously there are then disadvantages in terms of if your book straddles lots of different disciplines, you may be better off with a bigger publisher that already has lists in all those disciplines. And if you're looking at publishing something like an ELT textbook or something like that, you will benefit enormously from having a big publisher who have sales reps on the ground all over the world and have offices in lots of different countries. Whereas obviously someone as small as us, we just don't have that. So it's a real balance between working out what you think the publisher is good at, working out what you're hoping to achieve with your book. So when you've made that decision, you then want to start thinking about preparing a proposal. It's a really good idea to try to speak to either the commissioning editor or one of the academic series editors before you put together your book proposal, because book proposals are, they give me all the information I need to fill out all the forms I need to do and do my little financial spreadsheet. What they don't do is give me any idea at all, or very little idea, of how you feel about the book that you're proposing to write. And it's really hard to convey any kind of passion for your subject in a book proposal. They're very dry. So if you're someone who I've met at a conference or spoken to over Zoom, or someone who's just sent me an email, when you then send your book proposal, I can go, oh yes, I remember that person. They were really interesting. They were clearly really enthusiastic about whatever the book's about. And that really helps me be enthusiastic about your book proposal. It also stops you spending a lot of time preparing a book proposal that doesn't actually tell me what I need to know. And I'd imagine it's pretty heartbreaking to have poured your heart into a book proposal and, you know, worked up the courage to press send, and for me to come back 5 minutes later and say, no, this doesn't work at all. So please do email, come and speak to us at conferences when we're there. We'd love to talk to you, and I think that's true of all of my colleagues, and I think that's true of everyone who's the commissioning editor for any of the publishers you're likely to be working to. So once you've done that, all publishers will have their book proposal guidelines on their website. To follow them carefully and try to do them for the right publisher. They're all more or less the same. They're the same kind of questions in a slightly different order. But when you've been a commissioning editor for as long as we have, I can recognise a Springer book proposal template when it comes in. And it doesn't really matter, but purely for vanity's sake, I like to think that we were your first choice. It kind of predisposes me to look kindly on your book proposal if I think that, you know, your one ambition is to be published by Multilingual Matters. So there are a couple of things that really stick out on a book proposal, and I think often they're questions that we ask that someone writing a book proposal thinks that we're looking for a completely different answer from what we're actually looking for. So all book proposal forms will ask you for something along the lines of competing titles. And I think the temptation for particularly a first-time author is to say there are no competing titles. My book is completely unique, and that's why you should publish it. And it's probably technically true that your book is unique, that no one has ever studied that particular group of people in that particular context using that particular methodology. But what we're actually looking for is not for you to tell us that there's nothing else in the world like your book. What we want is an indication of how you see your book fitting into our list and to the wider academic conversation on whatever your book is about. So we'd be looking for you to look through our recent titles and say, perhaps, you know, oh, that book's in a different geographical context, but they're talking about, you know, teacher identity or something. So that's relevant. And then, you know, there might be a book that's the same geographical context, but a slightly different area of study. And the same will be true of other publishers as well. So that's what we're looking for that question. So the next one is sending a proposal for your PhD, if that's what you're proposing and not for a book. And you won't have started rewriting it probably when you're submitting the proposal, but we want an indication that you understand the amount of work that's going to have to be done to turn your thesis into a book. And I'll come on to that later, but if you send us a proposal for your PhD, that immediately suggests to me that you haven't really thought through the process that you're going to have to go through. And a big tell, because obviously it's the first thing I see on a book proposal, is the title. And there's a world of a difference between a good thesis title and a good book title. And so spend some time thinking about the title, and we actually ask for a range of suggestions. You know, we might tell you that actually you've gone too far in the other direction and your title isn't academic enough. But the fact that you've thought about it then suggests to us that you understand what you're going to have to do to rewrite your thesis. submissions to multiple publishers. When I started at Multilingual Matters, which was quite a long time ago, this was a big no-no. And if you wrote in the question that says, have you submitted your book proposal to anyone else, that it was currently with one or two other publishers, we'd immediately say no, come back to us if and when they say no. Nowadays, I think realistically, all publishers understand the enormous pressure that academics are under to get published, and that if you end up waiting 4 weeks for the sort of internal editorial process, and then for your book proposal to go and be looked at either by academic series editors or to be peer reviewed, if you wait 2 or 3 months for a no, and then have to start that again with another publisher and another publisher and another publisher, a year can go by and you haven't really got anywhere. So I think what we do now is we will consider the proposal internally if it's with other publishers, and then if we want to take it further and I want to send it to our series editors, I'll then say, actually, we're now going to start investing in this, even if we're ultimately going to say no. So you need to withdraw it from other publishers while we consider it. Unrealistic word length. Purely from practical reasons, anything that's really, really short is really hard for us to produce and publish and price appropriately. Equally, anything that's hugely long is really difficult for us to price. I think if it's really short, unless you're writing for a series that's specifically looking for really, really short books, if you're getting down towards 25, 30,000 words, that's starting to suggest that maybe there isn't a book in what you're proposing, and you might be better off looking at journal articles. Equally, if it's 300,000 words, there aren't really 300,000 words worth saying about most things, to be honest. And most of our books are somewhere in the region of 100,000 words, which we can produce as a reasonably priced for an academic book. And it's a nice length that allows you to go into detail, but equally makes you disciplined in thinking about what you really need to have in there and what can be left out. Unrealistic delivery.
It's worth at this point mentioning that earlier we had a question about what makes the price of a book expensive.
Yes.
And the longer the book is, the more typesetting that has to be done, the more paper that is used to print it. All of these things drive up the costs. So purely for the sake of keeping your book at a reasonable price, keeping the word length to a good length is very helpful. So. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, it's one of those things that I think we forget to point out sometimes because it seems so obvious to us. But yeah, the more paper it will take to print your book, the more expensive it is. Unrealistic delivery dates. Again, this particularly applies, I think, to first-time authors who think that we want them to tell us that they can rewrite their thesis in 6 weeks and send it in, and it'll be great. We'd far rather you were realistic about your workload and your commitments in the rest of your life and give us a date that is ambitious but doable. And also, if you're claiming you can rewrite a thesis in 6 weeks, again, that kind of suggests that you haven't really understood the amount of work that's going to have to go into it. Equally, if you say you'll deliver it in 6 years' time, the field will have moved on by then. And people are generally late. So if you're aiming for 6 years, it will end up being 10 years. And nobody needs to undertake that kind of deadline, I don't think. So you've prepared your proposal, you've submitted it. I then will, I have various things I do with it. I kind of look at how it fits in with the rest of our list and with other things we're publishing. I look at what other people are publishing in related areas. I do a very basic kind of financial calculation to see whether we could make money on the book. I discuss it at our editorial meeting, and then if me and my colleagues are happy with it, I send it to our series editors, who look at the kind of academic content. So eventually you will get a decision. We might ask you for sample chapters. This isn't something to be offended by if you get asked for. Sometimes sometimes it's just to see whether you can write the things you're claiming that you'll be able to write. That's not a kind of criticism. It's you know, if you're attempting something ambitious, it's better for you as well that we all understand what we're getting into at this stage. You might be asked for a revised proposal just to clarify things. Quite often it's to clarify how your book would fit into the series as well. Or we might just offer you a contract, brilliant news. That's when the hard work really begins, and we basically tell you to go away and write your book. The most important thing at this stage, particularly in the last 2 years, obviously life happens, deadlines get missed. It's far, far better from my perspective for you to email me 6 months before your deadline and say, actually, I really think this isn't going to happen. Can I have another 6 months? Than wait until I email you 2 weeks after your deadline and go, oh yeah, really sorry. Can I have another year? So just keep emailing, keep the dialogue open. We'd far rather give you an extension that we know about well in advance than have you frantically hoping you'll be able to make your deadline, but knowing that you won't be able to. And ask us questions if there's anything we can do to help, if you need anything clarifying along the way. We're really happy to do that. And again, as I said, we do all kinds of things that make perfect sense to us, but don't necessarily make sense if you don't work in publishing. Really briefly, rewriting your thesis for publication. There are 4 main areas that you need to think about. And I think the main overarching thing is who you're writing for. When you write a thesis, you're demonstrating that you can do a distinct research project, and you can apply your methodology, and you can write in a particularly kind of heavy academic prose, and you are writing for your examiners who will be paid to read your thesis ultimately. When you write a book, that completely switches on its head, and your audience is not being paid to read your book. You're having to persuade people that they should pay €40 to read your book. So you need to get the difference really clear in your head from the outset, and write with that person who's going to spend €40 on your book in mind. So what will they find interesting, useful, and relevant? And all of these things kind of link and lead into each other. So a lot of the rewriting process is thinking about what you can take out, because when you write your thesis, you need to demonstrate that you've read all the relevant literature and you understand it, and you understand how it relates to your research, and that you've understood the methodology and you understand how to apply it. In a book, I think you can assume that your readers will take it as read, if you like, that you're aware of the major theorists in your area. So you don't need to stick all of the literature in just to demonstrate that you've read it. Quote the things that are directly relevant to your research, but you don't need to have a literature review chapter. The same with methodology. You might need to have a lot of that in there, but it might be better to have thematic chapters representing your research and discuss the literature and the methodological elements as they come up in relation to those thematic chapters, rather than going literature review, methodology, results, conclusion. Again, it's thinking about that audience and thinking about what they will find interesting, how they will use the book, how they will read through it. When you pick up a book and read it, do you want the first 2 chapters to be literature review and methodology, or do you want to read an opening chapter that's really interesting, tells you what's going to happen in the rest of the book, maybe, you know, gives away some of the results in the first chapter, because that's ultimately what people are paying for when they buy your book. Also think about the style, and that's partly to do with that structure of the thesis, but it's also to do with the writing style. If you're hoping to write with a slightly wider audience in mind, maybe teacher education, something like that, they might benefit from a lightening of the really heavy academic prose. I'm just taking the time because I can talk about this for years, and I'm aware that people might have questions. Edited books, really quickly. There are a couple of things to think about with this, and I think quite often when you work on your first edited book, you'll be working with someone who's maybe done it before, so you'll be able to draw on their experience, but I think it's easy to underestimate how difficult it can be getting an edited book together. You're working across time zones and continents, and obviously for the past couple of years you haven't been able to get together in person, and there's, you know, different academic cultures, and so it's easy to underestimate the amount of time it will take and the amount of work it requires to produce a really good edited book. It's more straightforward to get people to submit chapters, put them all into a Word document and send them off to the publisher. But to produce an edited book that has real value, and really good ones have real value to the field, I think, is really hard work. So you do need to be realistic about the deadlines, because and thinking about how it will fit in with everything else you're doing and your own writing, because you're going to be spending an awful lot of time editing other people's writing and chasing other people for their writing rather than actually doing your own writing. We will need to, when you send a book proposal for an edited book, we need to see a full contributor list and abstracts before we can offer you a contract. But we do understand that then in the 2 or 3 years it takes to put an edited book together, things will change. People will drop out. People will submit chapters that aren't up to scratch, and you'll have to replace them. So we're not going to hold you to it. But equally, we can't give you a contract on a kind of wish list of contributors. But if you're thinking about putting an edited book together, you're more than welcome to get in touch and say, you know, this is the kind of thing I'm thinking of doing. Is this something that would be of interest to you? And then it's kind of useful for you to be able to go away and approach authors and say, I've discussed this with Multilingual Matters and they've said they'd like to look at a proposal. And then once you're into the process, you're very welcome to get in touch and ask for help and advice. We publish a lot of edited books, and so we have dealt with all of the drama and heartache that can accompany them. And so we can generally say, you know, this is how another group of editors dealt with this particular issue and that worked, or don't do that, that caused enormous problems before. So again, it's kind of keeping in touch and talking to us. And also, I think sometimes it's useful to be able to use the publisher as the bad guy in these circumstances. And you know, it's useful to be able to chase up your very late contributors saying that the publisher is threatening to cancel the contract if they don't deliver now. And we're happy to be the bad guy sometimes. And working with a publisher. I mean, I think ideally this is a relationship, and you know, this will take place over 2 or 3 years probably, of relatively frequent contact. I think and I think this is more of an issue for bigger publishers, is who should I talk to if I've got an issue? And I would suggest your commission editor should always be your first port of call, and then they can direct you on to other people. What are we doing while you're writing your manuscript? You kind of go away and write a book in 2 years. What are we doing, apart from chasing you for deadlines occasionally? We are publishing other books and working on other books. From the editorial side, I'm working on somewhere between 180 and 200 books at any one time over different stages of the process. And that's the same for the marketing department and the sales department. And so we're constantly looking at links between the books that are in different stages of the process, and planning, depending on what's going to be published when, and the books that link together. So, for example, I've just been preparing proposals for the editorial meeting that we're having tomorrow. And there's a section on the little form that I fill out that asks for other titles that we're publishing or have published that are relevant. So I'll always be looking at your proposal, looking at your manuscript and thinking, oh, that's nice. That book that's very, in a related topic will be coming out almost the same time, so we can market them together. I pass that information on to the marketing department. And then when a relevant conference comes up at about the right time, we already know. And we've already kind of planned for that. So we're always doing that, kind of making links between everything we publish, looking forward. Keep us up to date. Again, I just say this again because it's one of the bugbears of my life is people not keeping up to date. So please do. The importance of filling out forms. We ask you to fill out lots of forms. We're very aware that you also have to fill out lots of forms for your academic jobs, and everyone hates it. And the particularly heavy form filling out time is when you just sent in your final book manuscript and it's off your desk and you can finally get on with the 10 other things that you've been putting off for months. And then I send you a load of forms to fill out. They're really important for the marketing and the sales of your book, those forms. And I think one of the main jobs we do is making sure that information gets to lots of different people. And if we don't have those forms, we can't do that properly. And what's the best marketing for your book is you and your book. With a couple of really big name exceptions, there's a really clear link between sales and the authors who get out there and publicize their book, and do conference presentations, do book launches, promote it on social media, and we'll provide you with support and guidance. But ultimately, you and your book are the best marketing for your book. We want and need you to be really involved, even after you've kind of offloaded the book to us for production, and you're hoping that it's off your desk for 6 months at least. And I think that's pretty much me. Please do, though, my email's up there, but obviously it's on our website. Do get in touch if you have any questions at any stage of the process. Both, we're very happy to answer questions now, but just email us, set up a meeting, approach us at conferences. We all, Tommi and I and our other commissioning editors, all enjoy talking about books and linguistics and book ideas. And I think sometimes people feel that they're taking up too much of our time by wanting to talk to us about books, but it's time that we would only be spending answering emails and filling in spreadsheets otherwise. So we're always very happy to be.
Anna, we've had a question from Amanda Brown saying, given what was said earlier about books telling a larger value-added story, the difficulty of book selling and the rise of open access journal publishing, do you perceive a current or future decline in edited volumes, especially those publishing empirical findings and not handbook review volumes?
That's a good question. I suspect there will be fewer conference type edited books where the reason for those chapters ending up in a book together, those authors went to a conference together. But I think the edited books that make a real contribution to the field in terms of where the editors have, not to say that conference volumes don't, but in terms of moving things forward, where the editors have gone out and approached people to write on particular topics, and the chapters all kind of speak to each other and dialogue with each other, and the editors do a really good job of bringing out the common themes or the differences between the chapters. I think there's still will be a place for that type of edited book. But I think the more, kind of handbooky compilation type edited books probably will fall by the wayside at some point.
And it's worth at this point saying that if something is published, so open access is not just a journal issue, it is very much also a books issue, and quite often we might publish a very similar book that would have been published the traditional model of publisher pays and then recoups their investment through sales. We might publish the same book now as an open access book if there's open access funding available, and it might make a book more financially viable that way. A book that may not have sold previously but was academically excellent might now be possible if a funder has the open access funding. So another question we're very often asked is one on edited volumes, and that is, should you include big names in your proposal, and if so, how do you do that? Do you contact them first for permission, or do you let them know that you're going to put their name in it, and what kind of problems can arise from that sort of thing?
Yes, you should definitely ask for their permission. Yes, I mean, I think, as I said, we won't really take an edited book proposal that far unless it's got confirmed contributors and abstracts for their chapters. So you will need to have spoken to them in order to do that. I think, again, it's easy to think that what we're looking for is an edited book that's jam-packed with the very biggest established names in the field. But actually, I think it's nice to have a mix of the big names, which, if we're being realistic about it, they will sell books, with younger researchers who will bring fresh perspectives, and also people maybe from slightly different subject areas as well, who will bring a different view to whatever your book is about. But yes, definitely don't sort of submit a speculative edited book proposal with the 8 biggest names in your field without actually having checked to see whether they might be interested in doing that.
That's great. And we've also had a question going back to what we were talking about earlier, saying from Merv, saying you had suggested that if we had not published before, our thesis may not consider it for publication, saying, how would you, I don't know, could you expand a little bit more on that? I'm not sure we were saying that if you've not published a book before, but...
Yeah, so I mean, I think I think you should never say never. But I think, I mean, there might be reasons why, if I've understood it, it's not, if you're not published anything at all, I mean, there might be reasons why you haven't published anything at all to do with the nature of the research. In an ideal world, I think it's a good idea to publish a couple of journal articles for the reasons that I set out. But equally, I mean, we're not going to completely rule out a brilliant book proposal because the author hasn't, published journal articles. It might be useful to address in the email with your book proposal why you haven't done that. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say no.
It's probably worth having a chat.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exactly the time for the informal discussion before sending a proposal. Yeah,
I think I often get the impression with people submitting their first book proposal in particular that it's a big deal and you don't want to look stupid in front of a publisher, and I understand that. Yeah. But I think that kind of just initiate a conversation about it, and I spend a reasonable amount of my time working with people on their book proposals before I get to the stage of taking it to a meeting with my colleagues. So yeah, just do get in touch and we can have a discussion about that. And but yeah, I mean, the exception always proves the rule, doesn't it? So.
Absolutely. So we've also had a question from Ahmed Al Abri saying, what is the difference between a PhD thesis and a book based on that thesis? I think we covered that in the session after the question was asked, but Ahmed, if the question is still open, perhaps you could ask it again, or Anna, I don't know if you want to say anything more on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, I'll if you want to get in touch, I'll put my email address in the chat, and I can send you. We've got a slightly expanded version of the slide I have had that I can send you. But I think it's that point about audience, which is the really crucial point with thesis. And there are ways of if what you want to do is publish your thesis as it is, there are publishers who will do that. And there's nothing inherently wrong with doing that. But what we're looking for is a slightly different thing, because the reason our company exists is to publish academic research, good academic research, and get it to as wide an audience as possible. And theses won't do that. And if you publish with a publisher that will press print on your thesis, that's a publication, and if that's what you need, then that's what you should do. But if what you want to do is get your research to as wide an audience as will be interested in it, then you probably want to look at rewriting it and publishing with a publisher like us, or Routledge, John Benjamin's, Springer, whoever.
That's great. And a question on the process. How long do you take to make a decision about a book proposal? I know it's a how long is a piece of string question, yes. but what's the rough sort of range of timescales?
Anywhere, I would say the quickest is probably 2 weeks if you get lucky with the timing of meetings and for one of our quicker series. It should be within a month. Occasionally for books which are outside of series, which I have to get peer reviewed by external peer reviewers, it takes more time than that. But it should be, even then, it should be within a couple of months. But yeah, I would say the most common is certainly somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks, I would say.
At least for an indication from us, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Yes.
And would you accept a manuscript that has been officially edited by an accredited editor, or does it have to be edited by us in effect?
Oh, interesting. Yes, I mean, we part of the value that we add is our editorial process, and so everything that we publish, from rewritten PhD theses right the way through to big books by the biggest names in the field, goes through the same editorial process in terms of review of the proposal by our series editors normally, and then peer review of the manuscript, and then our standards in terms of production process are really important to us as well. So it would always go through our own kind of copy editing, and our colleague Sarah, who's our production manager, she's just taken on a colleague actually, but up until about 3 or 4 months ago, she sat through and proofread every single book that we published herself. And that
word,
every single word, yeah. So that kind of quality control is really important to us. So I think what you might achieve is that process would be quicker if your book has already been edited, because hopefully there will be fewer issues with it if someone has done a professional job on the editing process already. But we would do our own thing anyway.
Great. And what are your top tips for an early career researcher trying to publish their first book?
I think my top tip is what I was saying about getting in touch and discussing your ideas at an earlier stage as possible. I think that's really important. Because I think it's good to get input from as many people as possible into your thinking before you start putting things down on paper. And I think I said, it does feel like a big deal to press send on a book proposal to a publisher. And so I think, if you've got input from someone like me, and you've got input from your colleagues and your thesis supervisor and that kind of thing, the more people you can get to advise you, the better, I think, before you press send. Otherwise, I think being realistic with yourself about what you're trying to achieve with the book is really, really important, because I think that has a huge influence on your choice of publisher and whether you should write a book at all. And so I think it's almost asking yourself these big questions before you get to the point of book proposals and stuff. I think that initial thought and discussing it with people is really, really important and can save yourself a lot of time and heartache further down the track.
I think one useful tip I remember somebody telling me that they used was that whenever they put a book proposal together, they pass it by their partner who is not in the field, just to see if the language makes sense to someone who isn't a specialist.
Yes, yeah, that's a really good idea. Yeah.
Another question, this is a common question that we often get given our name, Multilingual Matters. Do we publish books in languages other than English?
Do you want to answer that one, Tommy?
I will answer that one, yes. It's we publish very few books not in English. The reason for this is that we've basically got contacts in the English language publishing sales world. There are other publishers in other languages who would do it so much better than we could, because they have those contacts in their language worlds. We only have the resources to publish about 60 books a year, and as Anna was mentioning earlier, we have usually 180 to 200 books going through the editorial process at any one time. So we concentrate on what we can do well, and then when there is a possibility to publish that book as a translation, we would then license those translation rights to a publisher in those other languages. I would love to say that we can publish a book in any language, but generally we can't. We have published some books in Spanish, and they have done reasonably well, but I think in most other languages other than English, we would struggle to reach the market for those books.
Yeah, no, I agree, definitely. And I will also let you answer the question about how an open access publication works.
Yes, so I'm assuming that, I don't know whether the question is based on the editorial side or the sales and distribution side, but the editorial side is broadly the same as any other book. You have to present your book proposal to us and justify to us why it is academically valuable. We do not publish anything that we do not think we could probably sell commercially. That's part of our own. We don't make an exception for open access books, and that's really important for us to be clear about. That just because there's a fee involved, it is not a shortcut to publication. Once the book has been editorially accepted, we would negotiate with you a fee to cover the costs of the publication. Normally, we wouldn't expect to make a profit on that part of the publication. We would do it at a basic cost basis. The book is then published open access online, so there would be no paywall or barriers for anyone reading it. We would provide you with a PDF that you could or an EPUB file that you could put on your university website, on your personal website. You could share wherever you like. We work with various different partners to publish the book online as well. And then we would normally produce a printed version that we would sell alongside that, and we would then hope to make our profit from sales of the printed version, for which you would also get a royalty payment, as with the usual type of books.
All done, I think, on that one. I think that's why I popped back up again. Thanks very much to you both, and for everyone who sent in any questions.